My name is Afif Jazimin and I want to present about the right to education in South Sudan. For more than 14 months, schools have been closed in South Sudan as a preventive measure to contain the spread of COVID-19. When school finally reopened on 3rd May, it was a big relief for children and their parents. Going back to school was celebrated throughout the country. Children, their teachers and their friends found their way back to their school also in Pibor. But the learning condition remain harsh. Children in Kondako Primary School are feeling every inch of their classroom, yet the children are happy to be back in school. Many of their peers throughout the country have not yet resumed their education as their school remain closed. Teachers have not returned and some have not been able to pay for the requested school fees. Although schools are supposed to be free in other places, schools are occupied by displaced people who have fled violence and flood and in search of food, like in the girls' primary school in Pibor. In South Sudan, an estimated of 2.8 million children are out of school. So more than 2 million children, approximately 70%, are unable to attend school in South Sudan, placing both their own and future of the country at risk. Some of the out of school children are living in pastoral communities, moving in their cattle, meaning they are too busy to go to classes with any regularity in the newest internationally recognized country in the world. However, the largest group of out-of-school children in South Sudan are comprised of girls with poverty, child marriage, and cultural and religious view, all known to hinder females' schooling. So the Human Rights Convention, right to education, including adhering to the Safe School Declaration. So access to education is painfully restricted and unequal, according to a report by the United Nations Children Fund, UNICEF. More than 2 million children are out of school due to COVID-19 and other challenges accessing education, including financial barriers and flooding. Most of these children are girls. Poverty, child marriage, teen pregnancy, abduction, war, and restrictive cultural and religious belief on the value of educating girls have all contributed to this high number of children out of school. A significant number of the children out of school are children with disabilities. So the government has persistently underinvested in education. For instance, only 9% of the 2019 national budget was allocated to education, well below the Education 2030 framework of action target of at least 50 to 20%. In June 2015, South Sudan endorsed the Safe School Declaration, an intergovernmental political agreement dedicated to protecting education in armed conflict, and thereby committed to using the guidelines to protecting schools and university from military use during armed conflict as a practical tool to guide their behaviors during military operations. So, however, contrary to the declaration, attacks on the education continue, including the use of school by armed forces and groups. So, attack on school and attack on on students and teachers. Between the beginning of the conflict in December 2013 and October 2017, there were 293 reported incidents of military use on and attacks on school, affecting over 90,000 children in the first 6 months of 2018. The UN reported the military use of 35 schools for sleeping quarters and bases, and total of 85 schools vacated by armed forces. So in 2020, the UN reported military use of 10 schools. In September 2021, the UN by the SPLA-IO in Western Bahr el Ghazal, SSPDF, affiliated fighters had used a primary school in Tambura town as barracks for several weeks during the fighting until late October 2021. When government officials finally coaxed them into leaving, parents also have a right to ensure that their religious and philosophical beliefs are respected during their children's education. So no person shall be denied a right to an education. That's in the human rights. So in the exercise of any functions which is assumed in relation to the education and to teaching, the state shall respect the right of parents to ensure such education and teaching is in conformity with their own religious and philosophical conviction. The right to education does not give you the right to learn whatever you want, wherever you want. The courts have ruled that the right to education relates to the education system that already exists. So it does not require the government to provide or subsidize any specific type of education. So the government is allowed to regulate the way the education is delivered. So for example, it can pass lawmakings, education compulsory for imposing health and safety requirements on school. So schools are allowed to use admission policies so long as they are objective and reasonable, although parents have a right to ensure their religious or philosophical belief are respected during their children's education. So this is not an absolute right as long as these beliefs are properly considered an education. Authority can depart from them provided there are good reasons and it is done objectively, critically, and caters for a diversity of belief and worldview. So the recommendations for the Sudan, South Sudan, South Sudan right to education is to order immediate evacuation of military personnel currently occupying school premises. So implement Article 4 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC, which oblige South Sudan to undertake all appropriate legislative, administrative, and other measures for the implementation of the right to education and ratify the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. So they have to reintroduce legislation similar to the draft amendment to the 2009 Sudan People's Liberation Act proposed by the Ministry of Defense and Veterans Affairs in 2014. So which would have prohibited the occupation of schools or hospital by the armed forces, ensures accountability for soldiers who disobey existing military orders, prohibiting the military use of school, ensure that all children enjoy the right to free primary education, and take measure to ensure that secondary education is available and accessible to all free of charge and expeditiously and effectively as possible. So follow the international standards set out in the Education 2030 Framework of Action, which set out goals to achieve equal education opportunities for all, to allocate at least 15 to 20% of the total national budget or 4 to 6% of gross domestic product to education. So the design concrete sustainable solution to address direct and indirect financial barriers to accessing education in consultation with communities, including children, and seek further cooperation and assistance of the international community to ensure no child is left behind. Other than that, expand efforts to raise public awareness on the importance of education for girls. So develop retention strategies also to ensure the girls who enroll in school can remain in school, such as incentive for families to keep girls in school, including subsidizing any cost for uniform or textbook. Expand efforts to provide continuing formal education and vocational training opportunities for married girls and also women. In particular, expand access to alternative program in all states and inform the public about their existence. So we're moving on to solutions. First and foremost, ending the education deficit means ensuring every child has a quality primary and secondary education without the financial and systemic obstacle many face today, and that relevant government tackle the numerous violation, abuses, or situation that keep children out of school. This in turn depends on political will to institute strong governance system, including via the judiciary, to uphold and fulfill the right to education. It also depends on international actors who set policy globally and engage in education through technical and international cooperation. Finally, donors and multilateral financial bodies, including the World Bank and the Global Partnership for Education, and international agencies that help governments to implement ambitious education plans should recall their responsibility to uphold human rights standards and not compromise on key abuses that leave children out of school. This is particularly the case with international actors working with government unwilling to provide greater protection to minority, refugees, or persons who have been made stateless. In case where government do not allocate sufficient resources to underserved areas of or group or children, particularly children with disability, the UN should continue to hold all governments to account for violations of the right uh, to education. So globally, any champion country or government representative appointed to lead on global education issues must first abide by international human rights standards for all children in its territories, abroad, and in cases where they are also play a key role as a donors and be open scrutiny by its own um, national civil society, as well as UN bodies reviewing its performance. So in conclusion, a child born to an educated mother has a 50% higher chance of survival. The risk of child marriage and early pregnancy is lower if girls stay in school. So educated parents are more likely to send their children to school. UNICEF is supporting the buildings of classroom, the education and training of teachers, the development and printing of textbook, and working with communities to encourage parents and caregivers to send their children to school. So that is all from me about the right to education on South Sudan that is currently happening now. So thank you very much, and thanks for watching. Assalamualaikum.